Hello, this is Francis Lombard, and welcome back to Coventry Confidential. In this episode, my friend Will Dennis and I talk about the movie Point Blank, which I will be screening at the Booth Dimmock Library for their Sunday matinee free screening series. That will be August 3rd at 2 p.m. For Point Blank, which is a movie that stars Lee Marvin, Will and I, for my other podcast, discussed that movie's influence on the comic book creators that he has worked with. Will is an editor for comics and for about the last 20 years and has worked for DC, Vertigo, and Image, among a lot of other publishers. In this conversation, we basically take a look at the influence of Point Blank, why it is a classic crime film, and why it made Lee Marvin a star. It is an adaptation of the Donald Westlake novel, The Hunter, which is a classic pulp novel. So I was hoping that folks would be able to get a listen to this and come to the screening, which is, once again, August 3rd at the Booth Dimmock Library, starting at 2 p.m. Hope to see you there. Let's just jump into Lee Marvin's Point Blank. So you just told me you read the book, The Hunter, and also watched the movie. So it's been a while for me watching the movie. I have, looked a little stuff, and I am more, in prepping for this, looked more at Darwin's adaptation of The Hunter. Right. And I think I've read The Hunter a couple times by Richard Stark, a.k.a. Donald Westlake. I think for a lot of people, it's Point Blank. I mean, I think I saw Point Blank before reading The Hunter. Yeah. So I come at it more as a film guy. For sure. And, well, Richard Borman, who ended up, this is his first movie. He was just doing documentaries in England. He was a really young guy. He brought him on, and then, of course, he went on to do Deliverance, Excalibur, Zardos, and a couple other.
Talk about bearing the lead. He didn't start with Zardos.
And he also did some other movies later on that are really good. I mean, the guy, I don't think they talk about him enough as a director, right. And some of the movies he does, and especially the stuff that didn't, the big bombast stuff like Excalibur or Zardos, the stuff he did in the 80s is pretty great. And I think he's a guy who deals with characters really well. And Lee Marvin's an interesting person who, well, you watched it and read the book. Is he like the perfect casting for Parker as Walker?
Yeah, for sure he is. I mean, I feel like I don't know who else from that era, because particularly if you read the book and then you read Darwin's version, I mean, he's just an ugly character, right? I mean, he's just like, he really doesn't give an F about anything, and like he's just violent and whatever. And the thing that struck me even rewatching the movie was like how much of it is silent. Like how there's like these sequences, and at times they feel a little endless, but where there's no dialogue at all. Like, like it's just literally just quiet, and he's moving through it. And Darwin has a lot of that. Like the whole opening of The Hunter, the comic is like, it's all silent. Like there's like not a words on the page, for like pages and pages and pages. So, which is interesting, because I feel like you just don't get that kind of time in movies anymore. Like literally some of these sequences, 3 or 4 minutes where he's just like doing stuff and having these weird flashbacks and whatever in the movie. And it's like there's no dialogue, like no one's explaining anything. But yeah, I mean, he's perfect because he doesn't, and like Marvin could do the whole movie without any dialogue, essentially, like, because he barely talks as it is. Like when he does talk, and it's very terse and short, kind of. So in that respect, I mean, like there's a scene where Angie Dickinson's character is like starts like battering him, like hits him in the face, and then just starts pounding and pounding and pounding on him. And you can just see the actors in that moment, sort of like the director being like, okay, just hit him as hard as you can until you run out of steam, basically, which is what happens. Like she does it for like a minute, like kicking him, punching him, and he just doesn't move. Like he literally doesn't react. His face doesn't change. He doesn't move. Like, it really feels like you're watching some kind of weird actor exercise of like, you can see that. And she just like collapses at the end of it, like onto her knees. Like she's just like, and she's breathing heavy. And I mean, in that moment, I'm sure that was just like turn on the cameras and like hit him as hard as you can until you can't anymore. And it's crazy. Like he just doesn't react at all. Like he's just a statue, you know? And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, and you get that for sure in in Darwin stuff. I mean, he's not likable, and really not very likable in either one, you know?
No, I mean the character of Parker slash Walker definitely is. Well, I mean, we were as I was researching it, it's a guy out to do a job.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's interesting because there's two elements that work in the book, in the series, and then also in the movie about it's about guys doing jobs. I mean, we don't know anything about these, their weekends,
Right.
but we do
Right.
know Parker's like, I had a job, then I got screwed over at the job, and now I'm going to get back to the guys. And then you have the corporation or the mafia or whatever that is the syndication, syndicate. They're just doing jobs, and Parker's like working his way up
Yeah.
the corporate ladder.
Right.
And in one of the quotes that like I came across was like, think of him like a carpenter or electrician. He's from Darwin talking with Donald Westlake.
Right.
He's just there to do a job, and he
Yeah.
takes pride in it. And you can see that in all three versions, the novel,
Yeah.
course, the movie, and what Darwin did. That I think that's the idea, because he is such an anti-hero. I've read a bunch of the other books over the years, and does he change? Does he learn something? I mean, I think he learns how to be better at his job, but
Hmm.
does he? I mean, he just goes from one job to another, and then he takes some
Yeah, that's
time off and then
interesting.
runs out of money and then goes
Right.
to the
Right.
job.
Exactly. Yeah, that is interesting. Like there isn't a huge evolution in the character, which I don't know, but I mean,
But it works in James Bond too. I mean, do
yeah,
you
and it
really see?
worked in the Mickey Spillane,
Yeah,
Mike Hammer stuff.
yeah.
I mean, those are really trashy books,
The
and I don't think
Continental Op doesn't really
recommend,
change. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is some change in Marlowe, like in the Raymond Chandler books.
Hmm.
The last couple where he's just more reminiscing on like getting older and sort of getting to the end. And the last book's like The Long Goodbye, which I think is the best one. But and that there's a lot of stuff in there about like him getting older and like losing a step and that kind of stuff. But even that is not necessarily like a lot of internal, like I'm changing, sort of thing. Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, it's a lot like even because later than a lot of mystery series like the Matt Scudder, like the Lawrence Block books, or the James Lee book, like or James Lee Burke, like the Dave Robichaux novels, there's a real arc to like all of the stuff. They're alcoholics and they get cleaned up and they're married and the wife might die, or there's lots of stuff happening there, like internally, like with the characters. But even somebody like an Andrew Vax, like have you ever read any of those Burke novels? Those
Not yet, but I'm looking into those. Yeah.
Yeah, I went through a real period of just like being obsessed with those. But he's that character is exactly like the Walker Parker character. Like he's just like a force of nature, and he's just they're written in a very staccato sort of like the James Elroy books. Like it's very short sentences, very whatever. But you can read like 10 of those, and like Burke never really changes. But it's a similar kind of thing. Like he's not a detective. He's sort of a guy who does jobs for people, and some of it's kind of sketchy, and some of it's sort of got safe houses all over the place. And he's got some guys who help him, like crew that he puts together to. They're good books, yeah, but like I defy you to tell me like book 1 versus book 4. Like what? I don't. Like they just start to bleed together after a while.
Well, let's also look at the time that the Hunter was written. It was a time where people read. It was a
Mm-hmm.
time where, yeah, movies and TVs were still around, and TV was up and coming. I mean, Westlake just cranked these things out, and there was an audience for them. So, like with Bond and with Parker, people are just coming back? Are they coming back to see how the story gets pulled off? Are
Mm-hmm.
they or are they coming back for the evolution of the character? That's the thing that I guess is interesting. But it
Well,
was like,
at the time, I don't. I mean, like, 'cause if you read the Bond novels, like the actual novels, he's like a complete asshole. Like he's just a
oh
shithead
yeah,
from the
yeah,
first one. I mean, he's basically Mike Hammer. Like it's like a Mickey Spillane novel, but like with a spy element instead of a detective
hmm,
element. I mean, he's just like punching women in the face and sleeping with everybody and just killing guys because he can kill them. Like he's
yep,
not the charming, dashing Sean Connery that they come up with a couple of years later, but. Yeah, it's the first novels in 1962, which is around
okay.
a similar time that like the first James Bond ones are coming out, and the the Mike Hammer books
62.
obviously are like super popular, but in that era too.
Yeah, it's 62. It's still the 50s in a way. It's
Yeah,
madman
right.
time.
Yeah.
Bond had been out, but the first Doctor No was what, 61?
I think,
61, 62?
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. Right around then. I don't know. I
Yeah.
would say,
The movie.
yeah,
So
62. It came out in 62, so right around the same time.
we're seeing like all these characters in movies, I mean, being translated into movies. And I feel like Lee Marvin, he brings Hunter, Parker alive.
Hmm.
I think he embodies that aspect, and I think it's a great translation.
Hmm.
And from a book that, trying to remember, he doesn't write; he writes in third person. So watching this, and then Borman visually, I think picks up and brings so much to the visual stuff and gives you a sense, because there is just no dialogue in this movie. I guess I was just before we started, MGM, the time they time the movie out, they look at the script and they time it out, and
Hmm.
traditionally it's one page per equals 1 minute of screen time, but the
Yeah.
timing out, basically according to MGM, was 83 minutes.
Mm.
And then Borman's like, don't worry, it will be a 90+ minute movie. I don't know exactly what the running time is. I know it's under 2 hours, but what Borman does as a director is, I think, makes the cities, and he moves it from New York to San Francisco to LA, the cities and everything in America, and this is an Englishman looking at America for the first time,
Mhm.
really embraces the landscape. Really, I'm looking at some of these shots, and the hot, it looks like they were redone, um, for digital, but remastered or whatever. They are breathtaking. I mean, you can
Mhm.
see a director who knows how to shoot landscape, and that carries throughout his entire, career.
Yeah,
What he
yeah,
does
yeah.
later, and you see it in Deliverance, you see it in Excalibur. Just these visuals that add so much. But I think it's a great combination of a character who doesn't say anything, allows Borman to just really do what film does best:
Mhm.
is close-ups, cuts, big landscapes, and just you are coming along for the ride and trying to figure out emotionally, and you're affected by the emotional images that you see. You're affected by that. I mean, I just it's a movie that some people might get caught up in the violence and have issues, but I think it's a movie that, when you sit down and look at it, it's a gorgeous movie in a way, in its
Oh, yeah.
harshness.
Yeah, yeah.
You saw it so recently, so what do you
Yeah, I
think?
mean, yeah, I mean, like you said, there's whole sequences of him like driving down like the Sunset Strip, and there's like no, and it's just like all these cool neon signs, and then the house at the end that like where the Carol O'Connor, like the head of the corporation guy's house is, and it's like up in the Hollywood Hills. It's just this amazing like mid-century modern house with pool and like views of LA and the valley or whatever it is. It's interesting too because the book and the comic, it's all set in New York, like,
Mhm.
so like the opening scene in the comic of him walking across the George Washington Bridge, like, like walking into New York to kind of get my money back sort of thing. But the movie's, set mainly in Los Angeles. And then there's the scenes at the Alcatraz drop, they ripping off the money at the beginning from this. I never really
The
explained
outfit.
money drop, that the corporation drops this money, and a guy in a helicopter takes a box and they leave him the money kind of thing. And yeah, I mean the interesting thing, and I didn't look into like I'm sure Tarantino loves Point Blank. Like I don't think there's any doubt that he must like love it. I'm sure you could go find stuff him talking about it because you
Mhm.
can, because it has a weird one, it's very weird. It's very 60s in terms of like it's kind of
It's gonna,
psychedelic almost at times. There's all these weird
yes.
cutaways to these party scenes that don't seem to be realistic. And then he's constantly having these flashbacks, like after he meets his ex-wife, and then he's flashing to her. And there's even like a love scene where like they're rolling over in bed, and each time they roll over, it's like a different couple. It's like him and his wife, then his partner and his wife, and then him and Angie Dickinson, and then Angie Dickinson and his partner that betrayed him. Like it's like the weirdest thing you've ever seen. But there is a sense like that you get from Tarantino movies of it's like the real world, but it's just like adjacent to the real world. Like, you know, they in this, they never define like the corporation. They keep talking, you know what I mean? And it's sort of that feeling in like in Reservoir Dogs or even in Pulp Fiction, where
Pulp Fiction, yeah.
yeah, like it's sort of like there's almost like it borders on almost the cartoonish or something in terms of like who are these people? Like they're operating in this weird nebulous world, but it's Pulp Fiction always left me with that feeling of it. Like it's almost like a stage play you're watching. Like I don't know, like there's a sense that like you're aware that you're watching this very weird movie that's not necessarily grounded totally in reality. I mean, even down to like the suitcase with the glowing shit and everything, you know, which is like a what Kiss Me Deadly reference, I think. But
It's a reference to, yeah, the Kiss Me Deadly.
Yeah, so you know, I mean, is that you definitely have that sense watching this, even though all the locations are real. Like there's just this otherworldly. I don't know. That's the best way to describe it, but I always feel that way with the Tarantino movies. That there's like something. They're not as grounded in realism that like a lot of other films might try to be. You know, like you know, for instance, like the Taylor Sheridan movies, like Hell or High Water or something like that feels very like real. Like those are real dudes like doing that. Whereas I always feel in the Tarantino ones, like there's a level of like he's making you aware that you're watching a film that he's created. It's like Wes Anderson, but not quite as crazy as Wes Anderson about all that sort of stuff. But at least that's always the vibe I get with the Tarantino movies, that like there's a meta quality to them that like you know that he's showing you like exactly what he wants you to see, sort of thing. Like I say, even that scene with Angie Dickinson and her, like there's a sense like you can hear the director saying like go, you know, action, and then she just starts like wailing on him and you know, and like there's just a sense almost like a stage play sense almost out of some of the scenes.
When David Lynch passed away, people are talking about how David Lynch managed to do one things that movies do really great is capture dreams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these fevered dreams that Lynch did. And I think Boorman was doing that. I mean, look at the time it was made, where he's coming from, and just that whole element of what's going on culturally. He does, you know, bring this whole surreal element into what was not nowhere near in the book.
Right.
But that surreal element, the whole ghost aspect, you don't, is he dead? Who's this guy that's helping him? Everything in Alcatraz gets a little weird, and that allows for the cutting. And I think when you come down to the Tarantino, I think he definitely read a bunch of Westlake's novels, because it feels like the whole outfit, the whole syndication, the outfit, whatever, this criminal organization, that's not real crime. That's not organized. It's not the mention of the mafia. It's not sort of the whole element. It's a bunch of white guys committing business. They have executive offices, you know, in places.
Yeah, I mean, they literally call themselves like the corporation or something. And yeah, because at one point at the end when he's got Carol O'Connor sort of, you know, in his thing, he's sort of at least you think he might be the head, but he's probably not the head because he has to call somebody else. But he wants $93,000, and O'Connor's like, we don't deal in cash. Like this isn't a cash business. He literally says like, I don't touch the cash. Like there's no, like we're basically like, it's like you might as well go to the head of Procter and Gamble and say, give me $93,000. He's like, there's a great bit, yeah, where he's so stunned that you know Walker just can't compute. And at one point, then Walker just gets up like he's holding the gun on him. But then he just gets up and kind of wanders around like it won't, like his computer can't process the fact that this guy just can't hand him $93,000 in cash, even though he's like living in this huge house. He says something like, I've got $11 in my wallet. Like, you know, it's just like, this isn't a cash business. And then they, you know, until they figure out like, well, we can go back to this Alcatraz drop and it's the only thing he knows, so they've become so legitimate that Walker just can't compute that they're not all just like thugs, that are carrying around bags of cash.
Darwin even had, in reading some of the stuff, talks about it's sort of a comment on corporate America. I'm amazed that Westlake's able to get the scheme and the crime and everything. I'm like, is he researching this or just pulling this out of his head?
Right.
All these books, and they're so well done. The details are so well done. I think some of it he is just pulling out of his head, but it feels like there's some research there. But I think there is that element that you brought up about Tarantino and just everything, that it's a commentary on corporate America. So he's able to really take the crime guys and then, as you're just saying with Carol O'Connor, they held on to that part in Point Blank, and I think visually you even see it. That just the wealth, but then there's no cash. I mean, you have street crime meeting corporate crime.
They can't even speak the same language. Like he's trying to explain to him, like, we don't have the money. Like, that's not how we operate. And Walker, being kind of just the everyman, is like, he literally gets up from the couch and like there's just this look on his face of like he just doesn't know where to go next, because his kicking in doors and putting guns in faces like isn't gonna. Yeah, I think you even sent me a thing about that it's like it's essentially a guy who got like ripped off by the electric company, and he's trying to get the money back that he's owed. He got overcharged by the electric company, and he's trying to get the $50 back that they overcharged him. And it's like it is that everyone's had that feeling of, calling that 800 helpline and just feel like you're getting nowhere. There's just faceless. I know. And it's kind of crazy to think that the book was written in the early 60s, the movie's made in the late 60s. And now here we are in 2025. And it's like the whole world is owned by like 5 companies, and it's only got kind of worse in that respect, that it's just, and you can't just kick in somebody's door. Or maybe you can. Maybe that's, you see even this crazy stuff with the United Healthcare guy or something. Like there's an element of that sort of that frustration with this giant corporation, and just like, if you've got, the kind of person that takes the law into their own hands, because that's the thing, at a certain point, like Walker, he thinks about it and he can tell that he's kind of screwed, but then he also is like, well, I'm just going to kill you anyway. Like he just he puts the gun back in the guy's face and is like, get me my goddamn money, and then they figure out a way to get him the money.
And the thing is, nowadays, I was just reading this book, Davos Man. I mean, some of the billionaires and their corporations, they basically sort of create systems after they take them over that don't function properly. That your $50 is lost. Good luck talking to a real human being nowadays to even explain your situation,
Yeah, I mean, they just pull the ladder up like behind them, like once they sort of get to a certain level, and then it becomes just this very tone deaf. I mean, look at the Bezos wedding, it's just like, what are we doing? Like, really? Like, this is everything that's going on in the world. Like, you're just to me, it's like, I get mad at myself because I look at even like the guests who go to that wedding, and I'm just like, I can't believe it. Like, it's always just been like the people who have and the people who don't. Like, even the concerned libs that you think are on your side, like the Leo DiCaprio's of the world or something, like, you still show up to this crap, and it's just like, oh, right, you guys are just all like,
you really are,
you really are just cut from all the same cloth, and the rest of us are just like down here, kicking in doors and putting guns in each other's faces, like, it's crazy. But
well, this is an opportunity, because I've always looking into this, and even throughout the years, I'm a big fan of The Punisher. And I've always like, is this because, and also of The Hunter, of Parker. And I'm like, now that you've been in comics, and this was a conversation about how Point Blank is sort of, it started with us talking offline about how Point Blank has influenced comics. You said you had a poster in your office, and people refer to Lee Marvin, of course. Darwin Cook in his work always was referencing this in one way or another. Is The Punisher sort of an extension of, an evolution of this kind of guy, that Parker is an average Joe just frustrated with the system, but you're coming out of after Vietnam. So as Garth Ennis talks about, why would anybody want to emulate the Punisher? He's suffering with PTSD, survivor's guilt, depression, and he's a mass murderer. But he's a man who is frustrated with the system and becomes a vigilante. I think, is it Jerry Conway who created him? sorry, I'm completely
Yeah,
blanking.
one of those guys for sure.
Yeah, talks about the Punisher is not, he's a commentary on what's wrong with society, not, he's not a law enforcement. He's not a good guy. He's a
No,
guy
right.
who wants to tear it all down. And that's sort of what the novel The Hunter and Point Blank is, this guy in his own way tearing it all down. I mean, what do you think as somebody who's, into comics more than I am, when it comes to, I don't know,
Um,
if, I know you
yeah,
never
I mean,
worked for
I
Marvel.
wasn't like thrilled with the evolution of the Punisher from being, I mean, he's a villain when he first
Yeah,
appeared,
he is. Miller
Spider-Man,
makes him
like
a
a bad
villain.
guy. I mean, and
Yeah.
then it's like even later, I mean, he's really portrayed, in the Daredevil, like the Miller
Hmm.
run Daredevil,
He's a bad guy.
yeah. So I never really, when they really started to realize that the sales on it were good, which says a lot about our society probably, that, then, yeah, they start to make him sort of a hero anti-hero, which it just was always to me like, not a good look. Yeah, I guess we're just sort of drawn to these characters that, can take out some of the frustrations of the modern world that we all feel on some level. But it does tend to get a little one note. Like I said, I mean, even I
Mhm.
read all those Andrew Vax Burke novels, and they're good and they're entertaining and they're well written, and it's like a very strange, again, it's a very strange space. Like it's set in New York, but there's a sense that it's like he operates in this whole other world that nobody can relate to. But I couldn't at the moment off the top of my head tell you like what happened in book 1 versus what happened in book 5, where some of these other characters that are really actually more grounded in like values, heroic values, like a Dave Robichaux character in those James Lee Burke novels. I mean, there's a real arc to those books and like a real sense of like him changing and trying to be a better man and trying to, right certain wrongs and things like that, even if sometimes he, like him and his partner have to work outside the law. So, which I'm more personally more drawn to that sort of stuff than the kind of real just vigilante take no prisoners types. But I don't know. And there's times when you feel like maybe that's the right answer. I don't know.
In the movie it's a one-off. There's
Hmm.
no series coming
Right.
out of that movie. When Hollywood was a little in a little iffy state, and there was no conversation about Lee Marvin coming back for the sequel. He was not signed on. It was just like, this is an adaptation of a very popular novel, a
Hmm.
best-selling novel, and it's a bit of a programmer in a way. It's a
Hmm.
genre flick. These guys are coming in and they're like, we're going to make this, and then who knows where our next job's coming from.
Sure.
But there was no, like, in this day and age of like, oh, we're going to do a series of books. We're going to ramp up, we're going to buy the whole series, and now we're going to do all of
Yeah.
Parker, over the
Yeah.
next 20 years. I feel that these guys came in, and in filmmaking, you give everything you can. You're in this point in time as an actor, as a director, and you bring everything you can bring, you
Right.
know
Right.
and I feel this movie, some people might not like it. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is.
No, and it's
I
very
mean, you saw it.
strange. It's very strange, which is
Mhm.
cool, but it's very kind of challenging if you
Yeah.
are a person who likes a very straight ahead narrative. Like it really makes you pay attention to these odd like flashbacks and these dream sequences. There's dream sequences where he's waking up in the dream, but then he wakes up in real, like you think you're awake and then you're awake again, like in real life kind of stuff. Like it really goes down kind of 60s, a little bit psychedelic rabbit holes, like given the time that it came out. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it does just feel like they just totally go for it. Like it's just weird and like you just are sort of like, but at the same time, it's kind of low rent. It's like you can see why they filmed it in Los Angeles. It's like, sure, just there's a car lot here. We rent a guy's house for like 2 days to shoot. We have this, like it's really kind of it's cool in that respect that it's sort of there's like a kind of a funny like guerrilla feeling to it in the same way, that they just didn't have a lot of. And the weird thing I was thinking too is even like a Lee Marvin, like there's no modern day equivalent, I don't think. Like even to those kind of parts, like I don't, like who's the Lee Marvin character or actor in 2025? Like I don't know. I mean, is there one? Because he kind of plays this part in a lot of films, right?
Yes.
This
Yeah.
strong, silent, badass, sort of guy. And I mean, they're just roles in that era that are like, that's a Lee Marvin role, like, I don't know. I was trying to think like who's a modern day equivalent, like in terms of just, being that kind of actor, gets those kinds of parts, because it would have been a totally different movie if like Paul Newman had played him or someone else from that era had played him who was more likable and kind of charming and stuff. Like it
But
wouldn't, it
but
wouldn't,
Paul Newman's able to do the quiet parts too. Like you watch The Verdict.
yeah. Oh yeah, no,
He
and I
can do a
love him.
movie.
He's
He
one of
doesn't
my
have to say
all-time
anything.
favorite actors, but
Yeah.
he doesn't have that same. I don't feel like he has. There's too much of a devilish grin on his face at other
Yeah.
times that you just think he's just too likable. Like there's just something about him as like a person, like as the way he looks, his smile, his like you just can't help but like him, like in almost everything. And it's kind of like for him to be this kind of heavy, like it would have just completely changed, the whole thing. Like you can't even figure out in this, like, why are these like women necessarily falling for him? They're not even falling for him. Like he's just kind of forcing himself into these relationships and stuff. And it's like, but you could understand why every man and woman that Paul Newman ever met, like, was instantly enthralled,
I mean, that is the thing. It's like I think, like even in the books, and I think maybe even Darwin talked about it at one point, that you feel like Parker just has relationships because it's expected, because other people do it. And to move within society, he makes himself look a little normal. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm just maybe reading way too much into it, but it feels like it's part of the job that I have to have a relationship. I mean, I've
Yeah.
never suspected in all the stuff I've read in whatever version that he really cared. Bothered by he seemed attached to his girlfriend, but he seemed more bothered by the betrayal, which I guess, yes, of course you are going to be. But what was the history they had? Was
I
he after
mean,
her because he betrayed her, or was he truly in love with her? You
yeah, I
know?
mean, the movie definitely portrays it as, because there's all these quiet sequences of them like kind of dating and courting and then,
Okay.
in the ocean and stuff. And he does say, in at least I haven't read the novel itself in a long time, but I know in the Darwin one, he does talk about, there is a mention about how women up until the point he met this Lynn, who's like was his ex-wife, who goes off with Mal, was like his partner,
Mhm.
and she shoots him, betrays him right at the beginning of the film and the, thing.
In the book, yeah.
So it's not like a big spoiler, but he yeah, he does talk about how until then he didn't really, like, it was just kind of a thing. But then even in that, there's a whole weird sequence where where the guy, like right after they steal all this money, that they basically have this like weeks of sort of, like, he's in this aroused state for like weeks, like after any job. And then they
Hmm.
would almost to the point where it would become, she says something about like they're like nearly celibate, like by the time, and then they get another job. And like so when the relationship starts to wane a little bit, he does another job and then it like re-engages him in like this relationship, which is
Yeah,
kind
the
of,
novels talk
it's sort of a
about that. Yeah.
strange thing, but it's
Yeah.
sort of interesting at the same time. The crime is somehow this sort of aphrodisiac that re-engages his animal spirits, for at least for a time, and then it starts to go, starts to die down, and then he has to do another job, basically.
Yeah, it is an interesting life that Westlake creates for Parker, where basically it's the job happens, he goes on vacation,
Mm. Right,
then
right,
he
right.
needs another job. I mean, it's this cycle that this character seems to have, and it's the driving thing of like, I guess, does it make him feel human? Does it make him feel at all? I
Right,
mean,
right.
I don't know about in the movie because we don't see him go to another job, but I mean, obviously he has an emotional, his revenge is driven by the betrayal and the and it, I guess he wouldn't feel the betrayal that much if he hadn't felt something for her.
Hmm.
But
Sure.
that's the first, and it's interesting because that's the first character he confronts, in the
Yeah,
book,
right.
in the comic, in the movie. He's addressed the person who's betrayed him the most pretty quickly.
Yeah, right off the bat. It's like the first thing
Yeah.
he does, basically. And then, yeah, which then it just becomes like, I want my $93 or $93,000, or it's less money in the book, in the comic, but in the movie, I think it's 93,000.
Yeah,
But
and then and in the like modern day Hollywood, she would be the one he's working towards.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I have to have that. That's the final climax of the movie. That's
Right.
the
Final
payoff. That
boss fight is yeah. No, I mean they dispatch with that whole notion in the first 15 minutes of the movie, and maybe you see her in flashbacks and stuff after that, but it's very quickly kind of dealt with, and then he's just on to working his way up this corporate ladder trying to get his money back.
Let's wrap this up. I guess in the scheme of things, of crime movies and adaptations, I mean, what do you think of, where does Point Blank, does it deserve the place it has?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a movie for people who really like movies kind of thing. I don't think it's for your average person that's like, I want to watch a crime movie, But yeah, I mean, I think it's like, as you can see, I mean, some of the elements, some of the storytelling devices in it are, if I was an aspiring writer or even comic artist, for instance, you could learn a lot just from the way they move you through scenes and stuff, and the changing locations and all the rest. And certainly, I mean, even though the settings are different in the Darwin comic versus the movie, the Darwin uses a lot of the same set pieces and things, and it's like clear he was like looking at even some of the signs and stuff look very similar, like the used car lot sign that the one guy's on and some of the stuff. But, it's set in Long Island in New York instead of Los Angeles. But there's just so many great sequences, quiet, silent sequences. And as we were sort of talking before we got on about that, and the tricky part with comics, and, because I know working on 100 Bullets for so many years and so much of that being silent, the tricky part is to do that is very difficult, right? For a writer to pare everything down to the point where, and then just trust the artist storyteller to tell the story without any words, it's very difficult. And like, we spent a lot of time like working on stuff and taking out dialogue, taking out captions to have these silent sequences. Cause we always felt like, well, Riso, totally nailed this. Like, why do we have to bog it down with talking kind of stuff? But from the reader standpoint, though, often they feel very unsatisfied by that because it takes 5 minutes for them to read it, maybe, as opposed to, a lot of this comic books that are just chock full of what I would call like comic book dialogue, and there's a million balloons and there's tons of captions and everything's explained. I think a lot of comic book readers honestly prefer that because it's like the return on investment. Like, if I'm going to spend $4 on this book and I can read one in 6 minutes and I can read one in 20 minutes, like I can see why on a cost value basis that's appealing from a storytelling standpoint. Which one I would pick 10 times out of 10, but it's definitely been a thing. I mean, I've definitely over the years been at panels or at signings with those 100 Bullet guys, and people come up and like, I love the book, but I can read it so fast. Sometimes it doesn't satisfy me. And I'm always like, well, did you go back and read it again? Because the chance that you're probably just kind of like, you're not really giving as much credence to what's happening here on the page as you probably should be, because like, it's really tough. It's very easy to just put a picture and then have somebody explaining what they're looking at, like, as opposed to sort of really letting the visuals speak for themselves. But you see it in this film, like there's whole sequences that are silent, 5-minute sequences are long, and you're just like, this would never fly in a like in 2025. You couldn't go into the summer movie and watch the first 10 minutes silent. You're just like, people would be like running to the manager saying the sound wasn't working or something.
It's really funny with some of the short films I've made over the last couple of years. I haven't really, I just wanted to get the film done. And I've realized when I don't have my characters speaking, even though, because one, I'm not that happy with the script, but I just wanted to get the thing making and go through the promotions. It's really what I feel excited about, and what I think really excels for everybody is the quiet stuff. Is just having somebody looking at something or looking at somebody else and exchanging, and just having the actor just sit quietly, or not sit, but do something quietly, and not having to explain himself, and just go through the process. And that's always been the aspect of making that's been the highlight of making it, and then editing it, and then even the performance, and going, wow, that really came together in this no budget exercise that we were doing. I mean, that feels like a real part of a real movie.
Right.
And I think, yeah, comic book creators should look at Point Blank in what they do and just the images. And I feel like 100 Bullets, thinking of what Grant Morrison says, is that we're not engaging in a piece of art that is linear. We can stop and take our time and look at that page that has no word balloons, and what did Eduardo put there? What did the colorist put there? What is even the size of the frame? What does that mean?
Right.
To the next panel, the juxtaposition. And then maybe I go backwards and look at it. Really think about what Morrison has said repeatedly about what comics really are, this non-linear piece of art of narrative art that changes depending on what you give it, and also where you start too.
Yeah.
And I think, prepping for this, I've been jumping into Point Blank, and I think Borman does that a bit too. But I think as a creator, this is Portrait of an Editor, but for creators too, there's something there. I think
I think that's the magic of comics, is that it requires you to be like an active reader, and that's why I feel like so many comics are lazy, because it doesn't. It's like, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. You're going to see what I just did, and then I'm going to talk about what I just did afterwards. Like there's that sort of sequence of that very expositional kind of comic book crap that I just personally don't like. Where other stuff makes you be very active. I mean, even Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics talks all about in the gutters in between panels. That's when everything's happening. All the action is essentially off camera, because all you're seeing are the still photographs of a film, essentially. You're looking at the frames, but your brain in those in between is doing all the work of the guy pulls out the gun and then he shoots the gun in the next panel, and the guy gets shot in the panel after that. Your brain is making that motion work. It requires you to be very active. So that's why I've always worked on books, or liked books that where we do try to strip that stuff out and just kind of let it speak for itself, or just let it sit there, or I used to, even when I used to get to balloon all the pages for years at Vertigo, and I don't do it anymore. I miss doing it though, because I would spend a lot of time placing the balloons in such a way that, they're okay, well, it's supposed to be in panel 2, but let's leave panel 2 silent and move it to 3. So there's a beat there where, the person's thinking about it or something happens. I would really spend a lot of time trying to move you through a page or separate balloons. Sometimes one, and then you add a long separator and then another, because there's a beat in your head as you're reading it, so a pacing standpoint. Yeah. I mean, I want to say to my credit, but I had artists over the years like Guerra and other people, even Riso, because he didn't know who was doing the placements, He asked me oh, who does the placements? Because they're, really well done and the pacing is good. And I was always oh, I always do it. I literally would just take a black and white page and with a Sharpie marker, draw in the balloons and then just put a number and then make that correspond to the number in the script, to give to the letter. But yeah, I definitely miss that, because I felt like I spent a lot of time, and all my stupid film knowledge and comic book knowledge, you really got to draw on it for this, watching these kind of random esoteric films. You're well, let's just make this whole page silent, and thankfully I always had a part, Brian was always a good partner in that he's not a particularly talkative guy to begin with, and I'm sure he thinks he's the Lee Marvin of comics or something, but it's just he sort of patterned himself after Lee Marvin in a lot of ways, but he, yeah, and he was always down for it. He was always yeah, let's just take it out. We don't need it. Let's just get rid of it.
Well, that's the thing about editing and filmmaking and stuff, is what is it that you take out that makes it all come together?
But that's the really good art, is about taking, it's reductive, it's taking away all this superfluous, extraneous crap. I remember talking to John Paul Leon for years, and his art was just he could draw every blade of grass if you wanted him to. But for him, it was what don't I need to show? If I can show you this cityscape and most of it is just the edges of the buildings and the rest is white, and you're, as a reader, filling in the shapes of the buildings and filling in all the stuff yourself, this sort of but that takes a lot. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of knowledge. It takes a lot of confidence, like to take your art and then like take things out of your art. When comic book art tends to be very busy and very clouded, and we went through a whole era of everybody drawing every single blade of grass or every muscle or every stupid thing like that. When it's like the really good shit, like for me over the years, whether it's like Toth or Kubert or Riso or like John Paul Leon, like it's like what they're not drawing,
what they're not putting in there. Yeah.
Not put there that you have to then actively engage in and fill in yourself. And, like that to me is the really good art. Like that's the stuff you should be looking at, to kind of figure out, I remember years ago, like working on Sergeant Rock, and there was a shot of the guys walking through the woods, like the snowy woods, and it's from the top down, like a bird's eye view. And it's like, he literally just drew little figures that looked like clothespins, like just an up and a down, and then a little line across to indicate like the guns they were like kind of holding at their waist or whatever as they walked through this snowy forest. But I don't know, there's something about it, like I can never get over that shot. Like it was literally just a rectangle with these little clothespin things, but it was also like a whole unit of Easy Company, like walking through a woodsy, snowy forest, like any minute a sniper could take one of them out, sort of thing. Like, but when you really blew it up and looked at it, you're like, there's nothing on this. Like, this is literally just like check marks that he just drew. The talent and the experience that it would take to just let that sit for the panel is like, that's why, I think he's like one of the most underrated masters of comics ever, Joe Kubert. I just think he doesn't get nearly the respect that he deserves,
Really?
I feel like so, don't you think? I don't know. When people start enumerating like big comic book artists, like
this might be for a whole nother other episode, because I don't know Kubert as much as you do, but really, I'm surprised. I'm surprised by that comment.
I don't mean within. I don't necessarily mean within the comic book creator community, but
but the reader. As somebody who's a fan.
When they start listing, who's your all-time favorite artist, like, and they might say, Jim Lee or Neil Adams or so and so. Like, do you think Joe's name? I don't know that Joe's name pops up in that first wave.
Let's do an episode about that. Let's remedy that. Let's figure that out. Why, and make sure, because he should be. And I swear that when you talk about him, I'm like, yeah, he's a master.
To me,
he was a master.
I would
he helped create the art form.
Yeah.
Language of the art form. He's part of that.
We should do it. Yeah. Because literally, one of the highlights of my entire career was getting to work with a guy and like getting to know him personally and like go to have lunch with him. And like I would get like goosebumps. Like it was crazy. Is one of the only times I ever really sort of lost my cool demeanor, and
got all fanboy.
Really started to fanboy and geek out, it was like anytime Joe would come to the office or whatever.
One thing about the description of the opening description that Westlake does in the novel is he describes them very simply. He talks about his lips, and he just like, I don't have it in front of me, but he basically just says his lips are incomplete. He uses very simple, very short description of this character, except for the hands. He does get a little more romantic with describing the size of his hands.
Yeah.
Make sure that stands out. So you're seeing this half-completed character in your head that you overlay, making him sort of this everyman working guy, because if anybody who's working, physically, their hands usually have gone through, you can see it on their hands, their history of work on their hands. And he does stay with that. But like, I remember now when you're talking about being, what you don't put in is that simple description of basically he has a few lines for his mouth. It's almost incomplete. Yeah. So even Westlake's doing that, and I think artists are catching on to that too. We went way over, but
is there
any last is there any last thing that somebody who in comics that they could pull out of, you touched about it a couple of times, but just want to make sure, could pull out of Point Blank?
Yeah, I just think that probably the main thing, as I said, was that, you can sometimes just let the visuals tell the story, which in comics, I think a lot of times we lose track of the fact that it's like a visual medium, and it becomes very writer centric, very dialogue exposition centric, when it's always been a visual medium first, So I would just say to keep that in mind if you were an aspirant writer, comic artist, whatever it is, it's worth watching. And it's like you say, it's not very long. It's just, and it's very unusual. Like, it's not like any movie you'll have seen this week. Let me tell you, like, it's very weirdly 60s psychedelia kind of, stuff. And yeah, I really like it. It's fun to go back and revisit it, after it's been a while, but I was glad to be able to go back and look at it. And the Hunter stuff is great. I mean, that stuff is great. I mean, it won all the awards at the time it came out, but rereading it again, like, that shit is awesome. I mean, it is,
the Darwin Cook stuff.
The Darwin stuff. I'm sorry, but it's just damn good stuff, damn good comics,
There's the 4 graphic novels that he produced for the adaptations of those are just spectacular. I mean, it's the pinnacle,
It's crazy. Like, just the tips and the tricks you could pick up, and just the stuff he shows you, the stuff he doesn't show you, just the minimal quality of so much of it. It's really something else, like rereading it.